I knew something was wrong when Daniel didn't hug me at the door. He always had, even during his teenage years when his voice cracked and he thought showing affection was weakness. But that night, on my 73rd birthday, he simply said, "Hi, Ma," then turned and called out to Ashley in the kitchen. The scent of rosemary roast floated through the air, but the warmth wasn't there. Ashley peeked out with a bright smile. "Happy birthday, Mary," she said, and I smiled back, polite. She wore one of those blouses with sleeves that swirled when she moved, like a dancer always mid-spin. "We've got your seat right here." My seat was at the far end of the long glass table, 2 places from Daniel, 3 from Ashley, and across from her coworker, a woman I'd never met. They'd invited guests, new friends, people who didn't know that this table once had nicked wood and mismatched chairs before I refinished it by hand. That the candles they'd placed in the center used to sit beside a framed photo of my late husband. I sat and folded my napkin across my lap. For a while, the room buzzed. Glasses clinked. Someone poured me wine I hadn't asked for. I answered small questions with smaller answers. Everyone was too busy laughing at Ashley's stories about baby names and nursery themes to notice I hadn't touched my plate. Then Daniel tapped his spoon against his glass. The room quieted. I felt my chest go cold. "I just want to say how lucky we are," he began, looking across the table, not at me, but at Ashley. "We're expecting our first, and we couldn't be more thrilled. And we're also excited about this next step." He paused. Ashley took out her phone and started filming. "We've decided," Daniel continued, "that it's time we take over the house. Really make it ours." There was a brief clap from the end of the table. Someone laughed. I didn't. Ashley chimed in. "It's perfect timing, really. The baby needs space, and we thought it'd be best if you transitioned to somewhere quieter, maybe something with less maintenance too." My fork clattered against the plate. I hadn't meant to drop it. Daniel's eyes flicked to mine, but not with concern. It was the glance of someone checking if a wound had finally landed. Ashley smiled, camera still rolling. "We're just so grateful you've made this possible. We couldn't have built this life without you, Mary." I wanted to speak, but my voice was buried under the weight of 2 decades of silent sacrifice. Daniel cleared his throat. "We'll help you look for a new place, of course. Somewhere cozy." I swallowed hard. My throat burned. "This is my home," I said, softer than I meant. "I paid the mortgage. Every month." His face didn't move. "You helped, Ma. You supported us. But technically, it's under my name now." Ashley added, "And that's just on paper. Family is about trust." I stood without realizing it. My hands were trembling, but I wouldn't let them see. "I think I need some air," I said. No one stopped me. No one followed. I walked down the hall to my old sewing room. The door was closed. The knob felt colder than I expected. Inside, it was no longer mine. My shelves had been emptied, the spools and fabrics replaced with neutral wallpaper samples and paint swatches. My desk, the one my husband built for me in 1983, was gone. The window, once dressed with yellow linen curtains I'd stitched by hand, was bare. My chest tightened, but no tears came. I didn't cry anymore. I hadn't cried in years. Grief had changed shape. It didn't pour. It pressed like a vice. In the corner stood my mannequin, still wearing the half-pinned muslin dress I had started before everything got too busy. I touched it with my fingertips. One of the pins pricked me. I didn't flinch. When I returned to the dining room, everyone had moved on to dessert. Someone was slicing cake. Daniel and Ashley were already laughing again. My seat was cleared. My plate had been removed. I walked past them quietly and went upstairs to my bedroom. The door was open. It always had been. But the way the bed had been made, the pillows propped like a hotel display, made it look staged. My wedding photo was gone. In its place, on the dresser, was a jar of pastel baby socks. There was a folded letter resting on my quilt. I sat down and read it in full. "Dear Ma, we love you and we're grateful for everything you've done. We truly think this move will be better for everyone. We found a lovely retirement villa in Umbria we think you'll like. Daniel and Ashley." My eyes didn't blur. My hands didn't shake. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer beneath my sewing journal. Then I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the beige ledger where I'd tracked every mortgage payment since 2004. Handwritten. Precise. Pages filled with initials, dates, and notes in tiny script. I turned to the first page. Feb 3, 2002 for $1,332. First full payment. Daniel out of work. Used pension check. I flipped to the last page. April 2023, $1,874. Last contribution, 20 years. No missed months. I closed the book, and for the first time in my life, I said it out loud to the still air of the room. They're going to learn who they just dismissed. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. Sleep felt like surrender. Instead, I sat by the bedroom window, ledger open on my lap, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as the house shifted in its bones. The same bones I'd kept warm for 20 years. At sunrise, I dressed with care, beige blouse pressed, the soft wool cardigan with the loose pocket repaired only last month, and a pair of slacks I hadn't worn since my husband's memorial. I tied my shoes, tucked the ledger under my arm, and walked quietly down the stairs. The kitchen was dark and still smelled faintly of lemon oil and cinnamon, Ashley's idea of hospitality. I made coffee, not for them, for me. Ashley entered first, wearing her robe and carrying her phone like a third hand. She barely glanced at me. "Morning," she said with a yawn. "Morning," I replied without warmth. Daniel followed a few minutes later. He kissed her cheek, said nothing to me. While they scrolled and poured almond milk into matching mugs, I slipped my hand into my pocket and traced the edge of the envelope I'd filled last night. It contained 3 things: a copy of the first mortgage statement, a receipt from the roofing contractor I paid out of pocket in 2011, and a printout of the latest property tax notice, which still had my contact address on it. "I'm going out," I said, setting my empty cup in the sink. "Are you meeting the agent we mentioned?" Ashley asked brightly. "I have an appointment," I said. That was all. I took the bus to a small law office across town. It sat between a florist and a shuttered bookstore. The bell on the door jingled when I entered, and the receptionist looked up from her keyboard. "I'm here to see Mr. Parisi," I said. "I don't have an appointment, but I'd like to leave something with him." She smiled kindly and took the envelope. "He'll see it," she promised. I thanked her and left without another word. Back on the bus, I passed places I used to visit with Daniel when he was young: the old shoe store where he got his first school shoes, the park where we picnicked on Sundays, the hardware store where I'd bought paint for his bedroom when he wanted grown-up colors. Memories didn't ache like people think they do. They don't scream, they whisper, constantly. When I got home, the garage door was open. Daniel stood inside, moving boxes. I didn't say anything, but I did notice one box marked Ma's winter clothes sitting near the trash bin. The lid was loose. One of my hand-knit scarves dangled over the side like a flag. Ashley appeared beside him, placing a folded baby bouncer into a larger plastic tub. She looked up. "You're back early." I didn't respond. Instead, I stepped past them and went inside. I needed time, space, to think. I went to my sewing closet. It was mostly empty now, but tucked behind the last roll of interfacing was the metal file box I hadn't opened in years. Inside, birth certificates, tax records, insurance statements, and a small velvet pouch. I pulled it out gently. Inside was a brooch, rose gold, shaped like a sewing needle looping through a thread. My husband gave it to me after I opened my tailoring shop. "You stitch everything back together," he said. I pinned it to my blouse. The next day, I received a call from Mr. Parisi's office. He remembered me from when I helped Daniel apply for his first loan. "I've gone through your documents," he said. "It's more than enough to establish financial stake." My pulse quickened. "Even without my name on the deed?" "Yes," he said. "With 20 years of uninterrupted contributions and those statements, you can claim equitable interest. Depending on the judge, it could trigger a partition action or at least a claim against any attempt to sell or refinance." I swallowed hard. "What would you recommend?" He paused. "Start quiet. Serve them with a notice of inquiry. It'll send a message." That evening, I walked calmly into the kitchen. Daniel and Ashley were at the table, flipping through real estate listings on a tablet. "Did you know," I began, "that in this state, 20 years of mortgage contributions without being on the title still gives you legal rights?" They both froze. Ashley laughed lightly. Ma, we don't want this to get messy. Daniel gave me a tight smile. We're just trying to make this easy for everyone. I looked at my son. The boy I once sang to sleep during thunderstorms. You should have thought of that before you put my clothes in the trash. He blinked. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said. Then I walked away. The next morning, a courier arrived with a folder for Daniel. I didn't stay to watch him open it, but I saw the way his voice changed when he called my name across the hallway, tight, uncertain, no longer sure of the script. I spent the afternoon at my sewing table, rethreading an old machine, organizing pins, ironing old fabric scraps. Every action steadied me. When the doorbell rang around 5 p.m., I was ready. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Conte, holding a small bag. I heard what's happening, she said. If you ever need help with anything, or if you need a ride. I smiled. Thank you. As she left, she hesitated. They never deserved your kindness, Mary. I watched her go, then stepped outside into the golden evening light. My son stood by the garage, speaking on the phone in low, clipped tones. Ashley hovered near the door, arms crossed. Anxious. They both looked at me, but I didn't break stride. I walked to the garden and clipped a single rosemary stem. For memory. For strength. I hadn't planned to open the safe deposit box that day, but sometimes your fingers act on their own before your mind catches up. By the time I realized it, I was already on the bus, the small brass key resting inside my palm like a sleeping secret. I hadn't touched that box since the year after Giovanni died. He had insisted we keep it, just in case, though we never defined what case meant. Inside, we stored only a few things. His will, my mother's engagement ring, the deed to the tailoring shop we once ran, and the receipt for the life insurance policy I used to pay Daniel's college debt. At the bank, the vault felt colder than I remembered. The assistant led me to the small room and laid the box on the table. Take your time, she said, stepping back with that neutral tone bank employees adopt to avoid intruding on grief or pride. I opened it. Everything was where I'd left it, including the note from Giovanni in his swooping cursive, for Mary, in case you ever need to remind them who you are. I stared at the envelope for a long time before sliding it into my purse. When I got home, the house was quiet. Ashley was at work. Daniel at the gym, or wherever he went when the heat got too close. I went upstairs and laid the envelope on the bed. Then I sat and pulled my sewing kit into my lap. I began patching a tear in an old tea towel, not because it needed fixing, but because I did. Each stitch calmed me. It had always been that way. Needle in, loop, pull, breathe. The rhythm of making things whole again. Midway through the hem, I heard the front door creak. Daniel's voice floated up. Ma. I didn't answer. Let him climb the stairs. Let him feel the weight of silence. He knocked once, then opened the door. Hey, he said, too casual. Can we talk? I nodded, but didn't look up from my stitching. He walked in, slowly, standing just past the doorway like a child summoned to the principal's office. I got the notice, he said. The legal one. Still, I stitched. I didn't think it would go that far. I thought we could handle this like family. That word, family, used like a rug to cover a stain. You made this house a place I don't recognize, I said without raising my voice. You planned to rent out the guest room before I even left. He looked guilty, for half a second. That wasn't. It's just, we need space. I finally looked up. Then make space. But don't pretend it's kindness. He shifted on his feet. What do you want, Ma? The question landed like a thud between us. I stood slowly, folding the tea towel. Then I walked over to the bed and picked up the envelope Giovanni had left. I handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside were two things: the original deed to the tailoring shop, with both our names, and a letter Giovanni had written before his second heart surgery. Daniel read in silence. If you're reading this, it means your mother has had to prove her worth. Again, let me be clear, without her, none of us would be standing on solid ground. She gave up her name on the title for your future. That doesn't mean she gave up her rights. When he was finished, he folded the letter and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. His hands shook a little. I didn't know he wrote this, he said quietly. You didn't ask. He looked up at me with something that might have been regret, but I wasn't sure anymore. I can't change what Ashley said, he mumbled. But maybe we can figure something out that works for everyone. I walked over to the window, pushed it open, and let the late afternoon air drift in. Daniel, I said, I don't want you to fix this. I want you to stop pretending it isn't broken. We didn't speak after that. That evening, I baked, not because anyone asked, but because I needed something that reminded me I could still make a house smell like home. I chose almond cake, my husband's favorite, even though Daniel always found it dry. The oven clicked on, the batter stirred into a memory, and for a little while, the world softened. Just before sunset, Ashley came in. She eyed the cake cooling on the rack. "You're baking?" she asked. Seemed like a good day for it. She hovered near the counter. "Daniel's upset. He didn't think you'd go the legal route." I didn't answer. "We just wanted a fresh start," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. "Then start with honesty," I replied. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "You know," she said, reaching for a knife, "I've never understood why you kept sewing. You could have stopped years ago." "I could have," I said, cutting her a slice. "But I didn't." She accepted the plate and stared at the piece for a while before taking a bite. "It's dry," she said, "just loud enough." I smiled. "Good." The knock came just after 8 in the morning, sharp and purposeful, not like the neighbor's soft courtesy taps or the courier's hurried knuckles. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door to find a woman in a navy pantsuit holding a leather folio. "Mrs. Marino?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Claire Vassell, from the county's Residential Claims Board. I was asked to follow up on the shared ownership inquiry. May I come in?" I stepped aside and led her to the dining table. The sun slanted across the wooden surface, warming the spot where I had just placed my ledger, open to a page from 2016. Roof repair. $4,800, paid in full, with a certified check. I left it open. Claire sat and laid her folder flat. Her eyes scanned the room before settling on me again. "You submitted a compelling case. I just need a few more clarifications," she said. I placed a teacup in front of her, without asking, and took the seat opposite. She asked questions, dates, receipts, confirmation of financial transfers, how utilities were handled, whether I ever signed an informal rental agreement. I answered them all plainly. The truth doesn't require embellishment. At one point, her eyes lingered on the sewing machine in the corner and the half-finished hem draped beside it. "Do you still work?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not for money, just for sense." She smiled briefly, then turned a page. "You're aware your name isn't on the title?" "I'm aware," I said, "but every brick in this place knows who poured the foundation." She looked at me longer than necessary and then gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Marino. We'll contact you soon." After she left, I stood by the window and watched her get into her car. I expected Ashley or Daniel to come storming in, but the house stayed quiet. I could still hear the tick of the hallway clock. The house was always loud in its own way, just not with voices that respected mine. By noon, Ashley had packed 2 suitcases. I found her in the hallway, zipping them without ceremony. "Going somewhere?" I asked. She didn't look up. "Just for a few days. Until this is sorted." She made it sound like an inconvenience, like my defense of 2 decades of sacrifice was a pothole on their path to modernity. "I suppose that means Daniel's staying." Her jaw clenched. "He's confused. And you've made it hard for him." "I've made it clear," I said. "There's a difference." When she left, I sat at the kitchen table and reopened the ledger. I stared at the numbers, all those years compressed into neat little lines, dollar signs, against memory. I had given this house 20 years of payments, 20 years of putting them before myself, and it had bought me a seat at the edge of my own life. Later that afternoon, I pulled out a different kind of book, Giovanni's journal. He wasn't a writer, but he scribbled now and then, thoughts, mostly, ideas about plumbing or jokes he thought of in line at the market. I kept the book not for its content, but for the shape of his handwriting. One note stopped me. "If anything ever happens to me, and Mary's alone, make sure Daniel does right by her. That house exists because of her." I closed the journal and placed it beside the ledger. At dusk, Daniel returned. He was alone, carrying groceries and avoiding my eyes. "I got milk," he mumbled. "You were out." I didn't respond. He lingered at the sink, fussing with a sponge. Claire Vassal came today, I said finally. He didn't turn around. She asked good questions. I gave her good answers. He nodded slowly. Ashley said, "You're escalating things." "I'm clarifying them," I replied. He turned, arms crossed. "We were just trying to build something. You started tearing it down before you finished the frame." His shoulders sagged. "It's just, the baby's coming. You thought I wouldn't stand up for myself." He looked away. "No, we thought you wouldn't need to." That stung more than it should have. Not because he said it, but because he believed it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the sewing room, bare shelves, quiet hum of streetlights outside, and looked over my small pile of things, a drawer of bobbins, an old notebook of measurements, customer thank you notes yellowing at the corners. I ran my fingers over the edge of the drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a receipt from 2008, full replacement of the hot water heater, paid by me when Daniel had just lost his second job. In the margin, I'd written in pencil, he said he'd pay me back. I said it wasn't about that. And it hadn't been. Until now. 3 days later. A notice was slipped under the front door. It was printed on thick paper, folded once, and sealed with a plain adhesive sticker. I knew before opening it that it wasn't a letter from a neighbor or a thank you card. It was a counter statement, Daniel's, likely written with Ashley's influence, maybe even her wording, a response to my legal claim. He had requested an informal mediation to avoid unnecessary escalation. Those were the words used. Not apology, not accountability, just a thin veil of civility, masking their need to regain control. I placed the letter beside the kettle, then slowly filled the pot and lit the stove. The water boiled just as the morning sun began painting the walls with soft amber. I sipped my tea at the head of the table, the seat they'd once moved to the side during one of their open-concept dinner parties. They never did ask if I wanted guests in my home. They just assumed. That's the thing about assumptions. They're like wet cement. Soft when fresh, but eventually they harden into cracks that can split a foundation. I reread the notice. The mediation would be informal, but binding. I could bring a representative. I already knew who I'd call. 2 hours later, I was at Julia's front door. She answered, wearing a housecoat and a pair of fraying slippers, her silver curls tucked behind one ear. "Mary," she said, stepping aside without needing an explanation. "I've been waiting." We sat on her balcony, surrounded by geraniums and rusting iron railings. I handed her the letter. She didn't need to read it twice. "I'll come with you," she said. "You shouldn't walk into that room alone." I hadn't asked, but she offered, which was better. "Do you remember when you signed your son's car loan?" she asked. I nodded. "And when you paid for his wedding cake after the bakery fell through?" I smiled faintly. They keep adding weight until we forget we were never supposed to carry it all. We sat in silence for a while, the wind pressing gently against the balcony curtain. Julia reached over and squeezed my hand. "You are not being cruel," she said. "You're being clear." I left with more strength than I'd arrived with. The mediation was set for Friday morning, in a glass-walled office, inside a legal co-op Daniel found online. A neutral facilitator, a quiet table, no raised voices. That's how they pitched it. The day before, I organized every paper I had, each payment record, every utility receipt, a printout of the contract from the roofing company, a photo of the hot water heater installed in 2008, still in use. I placed them into a simple folder, no labels, no highlighters, just facts. That evening, Daniel came to my door, not knocking, not shouting, just standing there like he used to when he wanted permission to stay out late in high school. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same way we had the day I told him his father was gone. He didn't speak right away. "I didn't mean to push you out," he said. "I meant to transition you, gently." "Like a houseplant?" I asked. He looked at the rug. "I just thought—" "I know what you thought," I said, voice even. "You thought I wouldn't push back." He didn't deny it. Then quietly, he said, "Ashley's worried. This could affect the baby." Then maybe she should have worried before drawing up rental plans for my bedroom. He looked genuinely ashamed, but shame is like fog. It can roll in thick, but it burns off quick unless there's real change beneath it. "I miss when this felt like a family," he said. "So do I." We didn't speak again that night. The morning of the mediation, I dressed with care. beige blouse, my square glasses, measuring tape still draped like a soft collar. The brooch Giovanni gave me gleamed subtly near the top button, rose gold and needle-shaped like a quiet shield. Julia arrived early, wearing a deep green blazer that matched nothing in her wardrobe but made her look powerful. She nodded once and said, "Ready?" I was. At the mediation table, Ashley's mouth smiled, while her eyes did not. Daniel looked everywhere but at me. The mediator, a soft-spoken man named Leonard, welcomed everyone, explained the rules, then asked if we'd like to begin with a statement. I would, I said. Julia leaned back slightly, hands folded. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's plans," I began. "I'm here to remind you that I was never a guest in my own home. I paid the mortgage. I paid the taxes. I repaired the plumbing, the roof, the wiring. I cooked in a kitchen I cleaned with hands that were cracked from bleach and cold water, and I stayed quiet." Ashley opened her mouth, but Leonard held up a hand. I continued, "You want to move forward? Start by acknowledging the ground you're standing on was paid for with more than your signatures." Daniel finally looked up. Ashley said, "We just thought, you assumed." I said, "But you didn't ask." There was a silence that stretched across the glass table like frost. Leonard cleared his throat. "Let's begin with documentation." I handed over my folder. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Ashley's lips pressed tight. They said nothing. The thing about paperwork is that it doesn't flinch. It doesn't try to be polite or redirect the blame. It just sits there, factual and immovable. After I handed the folder to the mediator, the room changed. Not dramatically, just the way air shifts before a storm. Leonard flipped through the contents silently, pausing to mark certain pages with sticky tabs. Receipts for utility bills in my name, bank statements showing monthly transfers to the mortgage account. A notarized repair order for the foundation settling, dated 3 years after Giovanni passed. Ashley kept glancing at Daniel as though she expected him to say something clever, something legally disarming. He didn't. He sat with his thumb pressed to his bottom lip, eyes flicking from document to document, as if looking for one that would disappear under scrutiny. "I didn't realize you kept all this," he muttered finally. 20 years of payments aren't something you misplace," I said, "even if people try to erase them." Ashley straightened. "We never said you didn't contribute. You implied it by omission," I replied, calm as a shoreline. "You staged me as a guest in a house I helped build." Leonard gently cleared his throat. "There is clear evidence here of long-term financial input, as well as residential continuity. Mrs. Marino, would you like to outline what you're seeking from this mediation?" I didn't hesitate. "I want my share," I said. "Legal acknowledgement of it. A formal record that this house was not built on goodwill alone." Ashley scoffed quietly, then caught herself. "We're not trying to cheat you. We just wanted to start our life." "Then start it with honesty," I replied, "not by quietly evicting someone when her usefulness has expired." Leonard interjected with a neutral voice, the kind mediators are trained to use when stepping between a slow-building fire and a barrel of kerosene. "Let's focus on practical outcomes," he said. "One option is to register the house under joint tenancy with a partition clause that would protect both parties." Ashley crossed her arms. "We can't afford for this to drag out." "You couldn't afford to lose the house either," I said, "but I still gave you that down payment when the bank said no." Daniel looked up. Finally. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't," I said. "You were. I just started paying attention." The meeting ended with no shouting, no signatures, and no final decisions. But something had changed. The record had been set straight, publicly and officially. Leonard promised to write a summary for both parties, and we left the office with separate silences trailing behind us. Outside, the air was damp and smelled faintly of motor oil. Julia walked beside me, saying nothing until we turned the corner. "You didn't raise your voice once," she said. "Didn't need to," I replied. "I brought the truth with me." She smiled. "You looked like a queen, handing over that folder." Back home, I removed my shoes slowly, one at a time. The carpet still bore the faint dent of my husband's old chair. They'd replaced it with something minimalist and hard, a piece designed for showrooms and catalog spreads, not for napping after Sunday dinner. In the kitchen, Daniel was sitting at the table, fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the wood. "Mom, he began. I placed my keys in the bowl near the sink. I didn't know it would get to this point. You pushed it there, I said. I thought it would be easier. For whom? I asked, turning toward him. He didn't answer. I grew up watching you sacrifice everything, he said quietly. Maybe I thought it was normal. Maybe I thought you'd always bend. I exhaled. You're not the first man to confuse love with permission. He looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the boy I used to carry into the doctor's office, the one who clung to my hand when the world felt too big. I'm not proud of this, he said. Then do better, I replied. That night, I reopened my ledger, not to add anything, just to reread it, to remember how every quiet act of loyalty added up, line by line, into the life they were so eager to claim. I ran my fingers across the final page. The numbers no longer needed defending. They had spoken for me. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began writing. To whom it may concern, this ledger belongs to Maria Marino. All entries are factual, dated and recorded without omission. It is not just an accounting, it is a testament. Signed, Maria Marino. I folded the page and slipped it into the inside pocket of the cover. When I turned out the light, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it just sits quietly in your lap, like a ledger that never lied. I woke to the soft clink of silverware. For a moment, I thought it was Giovanni in the kitchen, whistling an old jazz tune while plating breakfast, like he used to on Sundays. But it was Daniel, alone, quiet. I stayed in my room a while longer, not out of spite, but because I wanted the space. I'd spent decades leaping into every room the second someone needed something. This morning, no one needed me, and I wasn't offering by default. When I did come down, the table was set. Toast, marmalade, a small pot of coffee. Daniel stood awkwardly by the counter. You don't have to eat, he said quickly. I just thought, it's been tense. I nodded, but said nothing. He pulled out a chair for me. I sat. The gesture reminded me of when he was 6 and tried to serve me soup with a ladle too big for his hands. He made a mess of it, but his heart was in the right place. I read your ledger, he said, sitting across from me. Every line. I didn't know you still wrote things by hand. It helps me remember. He poured the coffee, careful not to spill. You should have said something sooner. You should have noticed without being told. He flinched but didn't argue. We ate in near silence, the kind that stretches between people who still care but don't know how to show it anymore. When I finished my toast, I placed the napkin beside the plate and looked him straight in the eye. Do you know what my name means? He blinked. Maria? I nodded. It means bitter, but it also means beloved. He said nothing. I've been both in this house. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Ashley, she doesn't understand what this place means to you, because you never explained it to her. He sighed. She thinks a home is about fresh starts, new furniture, blank walls. She doesn't understand that sometimes history is the foundation. She's not the only one who forgot, I said gently. He nodded slowly. Later that day, I pulled the photo albums down from the top shelf of the hallway closet. Dusty leather covers, some cracked at the spine, the corners soft from years of handling. I placed them on the living room table and opened one to the page with Daniel's first communion. His face solemn, oversized jacket sleeves bunched at the wrist. Giovanni had taken the photo with his old camera, the one he swore could outlive the family. I heard Daniel's footsteps and didn't close the album. Wow, he murmured, sitting beside me. I forgot about this suit. You hated it. He smiled faintly. I remember complaining the collar scratched my neck. You insisted on a clip-on tie, too. He laughed, a real one this time. We turned page after page. His first bike, his high school graduation, our shop's grand opening, with a crooked banner and free biscotti for anyone who walked through the door. By the time we reached the photos of his wedding, his mood shifted. He paused at a photo of me sitting alone in the third pew, not quite part of the bridal party, not quite background either. I didn't mean to push you out, he said softly. You didn't mean to include me either. He looked down. I let Ashley decide most of the seating. You let Ashley decide too much. He exhaled. I know. That night, I took out a different kind of fabric. The linen I had stored away years ago, meant for a project I never finished. A baby blanket. I had started it when Ashley announced her first pregnancy, the one they lost in the second trimester. She didn't want keepsakes. Said they made it harder. I never argued. I just packed it away. Now, with another baby on the way, I unfolded the square and examined the edges, still clean, still waiting. I threaded my needle and began to stitch. Soft yellow thread, gentle loops. The design wasn't elaborate, just vines and leaves. Something steady, something that said you are held, even if the people around you forget to show it. I wasn't doing it for Ashley. I was doing it for the child, for the future that deserved to inherit care, not resentment. As I stitched, I thought about all the things I wouldn't write into my will, not out of cruelty, but clarity. There would be no guesswork, no confusion about what belonged to whom, and no room left for erasure. By the time I tied off the last stitch, it was nearly midnight. I folded the blanket and placed it into a wooden box lined with lavender sachets and old satin ribbon. Then I wrote a note. For the child, when they are ready, made with a steady hand and a history that remembers. 2 days after I finished the blanket, the notice from the assessor's office arrived. It was in a plain envelope, addressed to me alone. The mediator must have filed it on my behalf, a record update request regarding contribution verification. It was a single sheet, but the weight of it felt immense. For the first time, something official bore my name alongside the house address. I set the letter on the table and ran my hand across its surface, the paper still cool from the morning air. I thought of the years I paid the winter heating bills and went without new shoes. I thought of the time I picked up extra alteration work to cover the broken garage door while Daniel was backpacking in Spain. A part of me wanted to take the letter to Ashley and say, see, this matters, but I didn't. I didn't need their approval anymore. I needed my own acknowledgement, and now I had it. That afternoon, I called the notary. His name was Lorenzo, an old friend of Giovanni's. He remembered me immediately. I heard what's happened, he said, his voice low and respectful. I was wondering when you'd call. I asked for a house visit. He agreed to come the next morning. When I hung up, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the backyard. The grass was longer than I liked. Daniel had always said, it's just grass, ma. Let it grow a bit. But I had never liked overgrowth. It made things look forgotten. So I changed into my gardening shoes, rolled up my sleeves, and went outside. The air was cool, but dry. I moved steadily, trimming the edges first, then tackling the middle patch, each cut a small return to order. Halfway through, I noticed the lemon tree had new blossoms. Giovanni had planted it the year Daniel graduated college, claiming it was a tree of turning points. The first fruit came 2 years later, right around the time we paid off the third chunk of the mortgage. I paused beneath it, brushing a hand against one of the new blooms. The scent was sharp and nostalgic. I let my eyes close. That's when I heard the screen door creak. Daniel. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, gaze lowered. I was going to do it tomorrow. I know, I said, straightening my back. But I needed it done today. He nodded and stepped into the yard. Do you want help? Only if you're not doing it out of guilt. He paused, then bent down beside me and began pulling weeds. We didn't speak for a long time, just worked. When we were finished, I handed him the clippers. Next time, bring the wheelbarrow. He smiled slightly. Got it. The next morning, Lorenzo arrived, just after 9. He came with a leather-bound folio and his familiar gold-rimmed reading glasses. His hair was white now, thinner than I remembered, but his voice was as steady as ever. We sat at the kitchen table, where the morning sun lit our paperwork in long golden streaks. I offered him espresso. He declined, saying he was cutting back. I made a cup anyway. He didn't resist. I've outlined the ownership clause you requested, he said, tapping a page. It recognizes your historical contribution and grants partial rights based on asset and labor. No transfer of title for now, just protection. I read it over slowly. Everything was there. Proof of payment, line by line, contributions, testimony of residence, and a clause that barred future eviction without written notarized consent. Lorenzo waited while I signed. When he stood to leave, he touched my shoulder gently. Giovanni would be proud. I nodded, throat tight. He taught me to sew, I said, half laughing. But never how to cut. You figured it out. I watched from the window as he walked down the front steps and disappeared around the hedge. That evening, Ashley returned. She was quieter than usual, her heels clicking across the kitchen floor like punctuation marks that didn't land. Daniel met her in the hallway. I heard murmurs. Then I heard the words protection clause and notarized. I didn't eavesdrop. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, she appeared at the kitchen doorway. "May I speak to you?" I gestured toward the chair. She sat, arms folded. I saw the paperwork. I nodded. "It changes everything. It secures everything," I corrected. Her mouth tightened. "Daniel says we need to find balance." I agree. Silence stretched between us. "I'm not trying to take your history from you," she said. "No," I said, "you're trying to rewrite it without me." Her eyes flicked down to the table. "I didn't grow up in a house like this." "Then you have a chance to raise one better," I said gently. She looked up, surprised. "I made a blanket," I continued. "For the baby. It's not much, but it's steady and warm." Her face softened just slightly. "Thank you." We didn't hug. We didn't pretend everything was healed. But she didn't leave angry, and that was enough. After she left, I folded the final letter from the assessor's office and slipped it into the ledger. The book was full now. Completely full. But I didn't feel empty. Not anymore. The next week began with an envelope that didn't come by mail. It was placed on my pillow, folded precisely into thirds, and weighted with a ceramic thimble from my sewing table. I recognized Daniel's handwriting before I even touched it. "We're staying with Ashley's parents for a while. They think space might help." No goodbye, no explanation of when or if they'd return. I sat down on the edge of the bed, thimble in hand, and let the quiet move through me like breath. I wasn't surprised, but I was still human. I left the note untouched and got up to tidy the room. That's what I did when life shifted too hard or too fast. I folded laundry, dusted corners, watered basil. I gave shape to things that were still in my control. By evening, I had stripped their sheets, wiped down the bathroom, and boxed up what they'd left behind: perfume bottles, a curling iron, 2 pairs of baby socks, still sealed in plastic. I didn't throw anything away, not out of sentiment, but because that would have made it final. Instead, I stored the box in the guest room closet, the one Ashley always referred to as extra. There was nothing extra about this house. It was built out of necessities. That night, I took my dinner at the kitchen table: spinach soup and a small heel of bread. The silence was different now. Not suffocating, but full, like something was finally breathing again after being stifled for too long. After I cleaned up, I returned to the sewing room. I hadn't planned to start anything new, but my hands drifted to a bolt of dusty blue cotton tucked behind my winter linens. I unrolled it, spread it across the table, and sat down. I didn't sketch. I didn't pin. I just cut. Hours passed, and when I finally looked up, the pattern pieces were neatly stacked beside me, and the air smelled faintly of thread and starch. I left everything on the table and turned in. The next morning, I awoke to the kind of light that made the walls look warm. I brewed espresso, sliced an apple, and carried both to the terrace. The lemon tree caught my eye again, this time not for its blossoms, but for the single fruit it had begun to bear: pale green, still hard, but undeniable. 1 week without them in the house, and already the soil had offered something back. I spent that day in the city, not running errands, but walking with purpose. I visited the frame shop on Via del Ponte and chose a deep walnut border for Giovanni's favorite photo, the one of us standing in front of the shop the day we opened, scissors in hand, ribbon mid-air. The clerk wrapped it gently, as if she could tell the glass held more than just a picture. From there, I walked to the small law office near the cathedral, the same place that handled our estate back when Giovanni passed. I'd made an appointment for a simple reason: I wanted clarity. The clerk was young, maybe 30, but spoke with the gravity of someone raised by grandparents. "I'd like to update my will," I said. She offered a notepad. "Would you like to list your beneficiaries?" "Yes," I replied, "but I'd also like to include a letter." She tilted her head. "A personal letter," I clarified. "Something they'll read first." "Of course," she said. "Take your time." I did. By mid-afternoon, I was back home, curled over my desk in the sewing room. I wrote carefully, the ink catching ever so slightly on the linen finish paper: "To whoever finds this first, this house was never just shelter. It was history sewn together by small acts of loyalty, I gave my years to its walls, not because I was weak, but because I believed a home should remember. If you forget who helped you rise, you'll never build anything that lasts. I signed my name slowly. Maria Lucia Marino. I folded the letter into thirds, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with a drop of wax I hadn't used since Daniel's christening invitations. Then I opened the ledger one final time. Not to add an entry, but to tuck the letter inside. That night, I turned on the radio, an old one from Giovanni's shop, and let it play softly in the background. Italian ballads, a few too sentimental, but some just right. Songs that felt like full moons over quiet roads. I sewed until the clock struck 10, the new garment starting to take shape on the mannequin. A simple house dress in dusty blue, modest neckline, deep side pockets, soft pleats at the waist. Something comfortable. Something that let you move, but still reminded you who you were. When I stepped back to look at it, I realized I wasn't just making a dress. I was stitching my place back into the fabric of this house, one seam at a time. The house took on a different rhythm once they left. The creak of the floorboards became more distinct. The sound of the hallway clock, less of a tick, more of a companion. No slammed doors, no hurried footsteps, no late-night phone calls bleeding through the walls. I had space to think, and more importantly, to feel without interruption. I finished the dusty blue dress by the end of the week. It wasn't perfect, one pocket sat slightly lower than the other, but it fit me the way the house now did. Honestly, not for show, but for function, grace, and memory. I wore it the next morning when I walked to the market. Paolo, the fruit vendor, greeted me with his usual nod. "Signora Marino, it's been a while." "It has," I said, smiling gently. He passed me a paper bag of figs before I could ask. "You always liked the softer ones." I thanked him, and he waved off the coins I tried to hand him. "Consider it back, pay for all the dresses you hemmed for my wife." That small gesture warmed me more than the late spring sun could. For years, I'd moved through this town like a shadow behind someone else's story, but the people remembered. At the bakery, Giulietta handed me 2 loaves instead of 1. "For freezing," she said, as if she could see into the days ahead. Back home, I unpacked the food slowly, placing each item in its proper place. I wasn't hoarding, I was preparing. There was a difference. Hoarding came from fear. Preparing came from wisdom. I spent the afternoon clearing out drawers in the sewing room. Spools of thread sorted by color, buttons into glass jars, scraps folded into a basket, labeled "maybe later." I even found a note Giovanni had scribbled years ago. Half a grocery list, half a joke about forgetting the olives again. I pinned it to the corkboard near my desk. By evening, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile. The lemon tree caught the last golden light. The lone fruit had ripened faster than I expected. It glowed against the deepening green. Just before dusk, a knock came at the door. Not tentative, not forceful, just present. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, alone, in his hands, a small plastic bag. "I brought the pasta you like," he said, voice uneven. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't ask to sit. He just did. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It was careful, like stepping across stones in a shallow stream, unsure which ones would hold. "I've been staying at the flat above Ashley's parents' shop," he said. I nodded. "They're kind, but it's not home." "It wasn't meant to be," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's struggling. She thought you were trying to take control." "I was trying to protect what I built." He looked at me then, really looked. "I didn't see that before." "You weren't taught to." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean you were raised to expect comfort, not to question where it came from." His eyes fell to the bag. "This is all I could offer tonight." "I didn't need pasta," I said gently. "I needed recognition." He blinked, then reached into his coat pocket. What he pulled out wasn't paperwork or keys, it was the baby blanket I'd made. Ashley must have given it to him. It was still folded, the tag I'd sewn into the corner intact. "For the child when they are ready." She said it felt heavy when she held it. He murmured. "It's not weight," I said. "It's meaning." He placed it carefully on the table. "She wants you to come to the next appointment." I raised a brow. "Why?" She said, "It feels wrong not having you there." I sat for a moment, letting that settle. "I'll come," I said at last. but not as an obligation. No, he said quickly. As someone whose presence matters. We shared dinner, figs and bread, olives from the pantry, and the pasta he brought. No feasts, just food. But something in that quiet, shared space felt fuller than any celebration. Before he left, I handed him the framed photo I'd picked up from the shop. The one of me and Giovanni in front of the tailor store ribbon cutting. Give this to your child one day, I said, so they know where their strength comes from. Daniel took it with both hands, reverently. You really think they'll understand someday? If they're raised right, I said, not smiling but not stern either. He looked down at the photo again. You look different in this. I was younger. No, he said. You looked certain. I nodded. That part stayed. After he left, I returned to the sewing room. The dress on the mannequin stood straight, its seams aligned, its fabric still holding the warmth from the iron. I brushed a hand across it, then turned off the light. The hallway echoed as I walked down it, not with emptiness, but with decision. Tomorrow, I'd visit the doctor's office. I'd see the ultrasound. I'd stand in that room not as a bystander, but as someone who knew how to build a future with her own hands. I hadn't set foot in a medical office in nearly 3 years at least, not as anything more than a name on someone else's emergency contact list. Now, I stood at the threshold of the small family clinic Daniel had mentioned, holding my handbag with both hands as if it anchored me. Ashley was already inside, seated stiffly in the waiting area, flipping a pregnancy pamphlet with more tension than curiosity. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes didn't narrow this time. If anything, they looked tired and perhaps grateful. I sat beside her, without asking. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said quietly. I wasn't sure either, I replied. Silence, but not the brittle kind. The nurse called her name, and she stood, then turned back and said, Come in, if you want. I followed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender hand lotion. Strange contrast. The monitor sat waiting beside the bed, cords neatly coiled, screen flickering with soft gray light. Ashley lay back, eyes ahead, not meeting mine. The technician introduced herself and applied the gel, and then, without warning, the heartbeat filled the room. Not loud, but rhythmic. Steady. Like a metronome tapping out time. Ashley exhaled. I realized then she'd been holding her breath. That's your grandchild. The technician smiled, pointing to a small shape swimming inside the grainy image. Healthy heartbeat. Right on time. I stepped closer, the monitor's glow reflecting in my glasses. I couldn't tell what was what, not really, but I felt it, a quiet continuity. Ashley looked up at me. You can touch my hand if you want. I hesitated, then placed mine over hers. Her fingers were cold. Mine weren't. After the appointment, we walked out together, both blinking into the sunlight as if waking from something more than a scan. At the curb, she paused. I don't know how to fix everything. You start by not erasing it, I said. The past isn't the enemy, it's the foundation. She nodded. I was scared. So was I said, but I stitched through it. We parted without promises, but also without tension. When I returned home, I placed the new sonogram image on my sewing table, right next to Giovanni's photo and the folded baby blanket. A triptych of time. Past, present, become. The next few days were quiet again, but different than before. Not lonely. Anticipatory. I finished another dress. This one, for myself. Soft, gray cotton, with buttons up the back. The kind of dress you wear when you want to feel composed, not decorative. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my wardrobe and pulled out a folder I'd buried years ago. Property documents, letters from Giovanni's cousin in Calabria about an inheritance too modest to fight over, and the original deed to the house. I took them all to Lorenzo. He glanced through them carefully, nodding. You've come full circle. I don't want to leave things tangled, I said. Then, let's untangle it now. By sunset, we'd formalized my legacy. Not in cold percentages or courtroom jargon, but in clarity. The house, when I passed, would go to the child held in trust until adulthood. Daniel and Ashley could stay as long as they lived by the rules set within the document. Care for the home, preserve the garden, honor the contributions made. Lorenzo smiled at the clause I added at the end. No renovations shall erase the lemon tree. He stamped it with quiet approval. That night, I returned home, not tired, but complete. I placed the new folder inside my ledger. Then, I walked to the backyard. The lemon hung low now, heavier with ripeness. I reached up, twisted gently, and took it down. In the kitchen, I sliced it open. The scent burst forward, sharp, clean, vibrant. I brewed tea, adding a slice of the fruit, and sat by the window. And then, unexpectedly, Daniel called. "Would you come over tomorrow?" he asked. "Ashley's baking. She wants to try a new recipe." "I will," I said, surprised at the softness in his voice. "She also asked if you'd help her pick fabric. She wants to make curtains for the nursery." I smiled. "Tell her to be ready for real sewing." He laughed. "That's why she asked you." When I hung up, I looked around the room. The house hadn't changed. But I stood, crossed to the sewing table, and gently removed the sonogram photo. Then I wrote a small note on the back. "You come from women who knew how to stay standing." And I placed it into the drawer where I kept my finest thread. Ashley greeted me at the door with flour on her cheek and her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She looked different, not styled, not rehearsed, just present. "You came early," she said. "I brought extra thread," I replied. She smiled, an unguarded one, then stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled like citrus and butter. On the counter, 2 lemons rested beside a ceramic mixing bowl. The one I had used for years was still there, tucked neatly behind the coffee pot. "Lemon olive oil cake," she said. "Your recipe." Daniel wrote it from memory. I raised a brow. "Then it may be missing steps." He said you always added a second yolk for strength. He remembered that? Ashley nodded. He's remembering a lot lately. We worked in parallel for a while, her with the batter, me spreading the chosen fabrics over the dining table. She'd picked soft greens, muted golds, and a bold print of lemons and vines. She hesitated over it. "Too much?" she asked. "No," I said, running my fingers across the pattern. "It's bold, but it wants to belong." She looked down at it, then quietly said, "So do I." I didn't respond with words. Instead, I reached for the shears and cut the first panel, with practiced ease. She followed with the second, mimicking the motion like a student still finding her rhythm. Later, as the cake baked, we moved to the living room with the fabric pinned loosely into place. The afternoon light streamed in through the uncovered windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. Ashley sank into the armchair, with a sigh. "I was raised to believe control was the same as care," she admitted. "But you hold things without gripping them." "Not everything is meant to be managed," I said. "Some things are meant to be witnessed. Like a child learning, or a house settling." She sat quietly for a moment, then said, "Daniel told me about the clause you added to your will." "The lemon tree?" She smiled. "Yes." He said it made him laugh, but also made him think. "It's not just a tree, it's a memory that grows." Ashley nodded. "That's why I want the nursery to face the backyard, so the baby sees it every day." We sat there a while in companionable silence, the hum of the oven soft in the background. When the timer rang, she darted up, nearly tripping over the edge of the curtain. I caught it with one hand and laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. She returned moments later with the cake. The scent alone carried me back to Sunday afternoons, Giovanni whistling, Daniel leaning too close to the oven, claiming he could tell doneness by smell. Ashley placed the cake on the cooling rack. "It's not perfect. No child needs perfection, just warmth." We let it cool while we hemmed the panels. I showed her how to fold the corners, how to pin with just enough give, and where to hide the final stitches. "Did you teach Daniel this stuff?" she asked. "No, he never stayed still long enough. I think he's learning now," she said softly. By dusk, 2 of the curtain panels were done. We hung them up side by side in the nursery, light filtering through in soft lemon gold. The room wasn't furnished yet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like something was on its way. Ashley stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I thought I wanted a modern nursery." "You still can," I said. "But this feels like roots." She turned to me. "Would you consider moving back in? Just for the first few months, after the baby?" I looked around the room. "Is there space for history here?" "There's space for you," she said. I didn't answer right away. I wanted the offer to sit there, whole and honest, not rushed into or accepted out of guilt. When I finally looked at her, I said, "I'll think about it." She nodded. "That's fair." That evening, Daniel joined us for dinner. He set the table without prompting and poured the wine with practiced care. The conversation was easy, not polished, but real. At one point, he leaned over and said, "I saw the dress you made, the gray one. It looks like you." "It feels like me," I said. He nodded. "It's good to have you back." "I never left," I replied. "You just stopped seeing me." The words weren't sharp, just true. He met my eyes and didn't look away. "I'm sorry." That was enough. After dinner, I stepped outside. The sky had just turned the color of slate, and the stars were slow to appear. I walked to the lemon tree and placed my hand against its trunk, solid, grow. Tomorrow, I would return to my house, sleep in my own bed, water my own plants. But tonight, I stood in this place, no longer erased, no longer displaced, just witnessed. The morning I returned to my own home, I opened every shutter. Light poured into the rooms, as if it too had been waiting for my decision. Dust shimmered in the beams, like memory suspended midair. I didn't chase it away. I let it settle. It reminded me that something had lived here, even during silence. My gray dress hung neatly on the hook behind the bedroom door. I wore it as I swept the floor, humming an old lullaby my mother once sang when threading needles. The rhythm of that song returned now, like a familiar road, slow, even, resilient. By noon, I brewed coffee and poured it into the good cup, porcelain white with a single blue rim. I sat on the terrace, where I once watched the world go by, hands idle, heart bruised. But today, I felt none of that old ache. The air was different, not changed by age, but by choice. After lunch, I opened my ledger, not to write finances or family grudges, but to begin a new section. At the top of the page, I wrote in blue ink, "What remains and what becomes." Below that, I listed no names, no debts, no gifts, only moments. Daniel's apology at the sewing table. Ashley's fingers guiding the curtain hem, clumsy but sincere. The heartbeat I heard on the monitor, the lemon in my palm, warm from the tree. I closed the ledger gently and placed it back on the shelf. Then I retrieved the framed photograph of the ribbon-cutting day, me and Giovanni, scissors in hand, hope in our eyes. I moved it from the sewing room into the hallway, hanging it at the perfect eye level. As I did, I caught my reflection in the glass. My face was not the same, but the strength, that old silent strength, remained untouched. The next day, I walked to the community library. I hadn't been there in years, not since Daniel was in high school. The same librarian stood behind the desk, her hair now fully white, her smile just as wide. "Maria Lucia," she said, "it's been too long." "I came to donate," I replied, handing over 2 pattern books and a copy of my handwritten sewing instructions. Her brows rose. "You wrote this?" "I lived this," I said. She placed a bookmark inside the cover and smiled. "Then it belongs here." That night, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The jasmine had returned, along the fences. A dog barked behind a gate I used to pass with Daniel on his bike, streamers fluttering from the handlebars. Some houses were new, some unchanged. A neighbor waved. A child passed on rollerblades, almost falling, then catching balance again. At the corner, I paused. The tailor shop Giovanni and I had built still stood. It now had a new name, painted on the glass. Atelier Serena, but the counter inside was the same, the wooden bench still scuffed from his shoes. I pressed my hand to the window briefly, then turned to go. I had no need to reclaim that space. I had already carried it with me. Back home, I began stitching a small banner for the nursery, a quiet gift. It would hang by the window, beside the lemon print curtains. Soft ivory linen, a vine embroidered by hand. In the center, a single phrase, looped in calm, clear thread. "You are rooted. You are rising." As I worked, I could hear wind through the lemon leaves outside. It sounded like breath, like time choosing not to pass, but to stay, just for a while, and keep company. I placed the finished banner inside a wooden envelope box and tied it shut with twine. Then I wrote a letter, not to Daniel, not to Ashley, but to the child. "To you, whoever you become, you come from hands that knew how to make space. From backs that carried more than their share, without complaint. From hearts that chose gentleness, even when it wasn't returned. You were not starting from nothing. You were continuing something sacred. I sealed it, and placed it beside the blanket and the lemon-patterned scraps I had kept. The next morning, I rose before the bells. I wore my gray dress, pinned my measuring tape neatly in place, and stepped outside with the envelope box tucked under one arm. Daniel met me at the end of the walkway. "Need help?" he asked. "I'm not that old yet," I replied. He grinned. "Noted." We walked the short distance to their house. The curtains I'd sewn shimmered faintly in the early light. As I stepped inside, I heard Ashley humming in the kitchen. She turned, wiping her hands on a towel, and smiled when she saw the box. "What's this?" she asked. "A future stitched in the past," I replied. She took it gently, almost reverently. Daniel offered me a seat at the table. This time, it was already set with 3 cups and a small dish of buttered toast. Not fancy, not performative, just I placed my glasses on the table, rubbed the bridge of my nose, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd held for years. Not everything had healed, but something had taken root. And this time, I wasn't the one holding it up alone.